Welcome to video number 7 in the Different Angle 3D Getting Started video tutorial series for Blender 2.9. In the previous 6 videos we've looked at Blender's interface and working in object mode where models are placed within the scene to build up the image you're trying to create. This video moves on to edit mode where you build the models, and we'll be looking at the fundamentals of working with vertices, edges and faces, which are the building blocks of all 3D models for mesh modelling. So we'll get straight on and open a default scene and start to look at the fundamentals of vertices, edges and faces. Okay, we're back in the default scene in object mode. I'm just going to do a couple of changes. We've got a camera and a light that we don't need. So in the outliner, I'm going to just take the camera and the light out of view. They're still in the scene, they're just not seen in the window while you're working now. I've also enabled screencast keys, which means you'll get the visual notification of any key strokes I make during the demo. And I'm going to add in from the viewport overlays the Z-axis. So that gives us the location of the world origin, which is on the X, Y and Z where they cross, which is X0, Y0, Z0 of the world's origin. We've got the default cube, and I'll just zoom in a little bit on that. Just roll in the middle mouse wheel. We've got the default cube in the scene, and to get into edit mode we've got the mode drop down in the top left hand corner. We can just click on edit mode and you'll see the cube now change from its large outline to showing the vertices on each of the corners, edges between them and faces. So the cube is centered on the world origin, and the cube has its own origin denoted by the small yellow dot in the middle. What I'm going to do is just open up the transform number panel. You can press N to bring that out, and the same with edit mode. You can press the tab key to change between edit mode and object mode. And selecting, as we looked at in object mode, is exactly the same, just a left mouse button click when you're over a vertex at the moment. Next to edit mode you've got the mode type, so we're in vertex select mode, the select mode type, but you can change to edge select mode and face select mode on there, or you can use shortcut keys, which is shift number 1 on the keyboard, which is the numbers that are above the letter keys, which is the vertex select mode shortcut. Shift number 2 above the keyboard, which is the edge select, and that selects both, and you can toggle the selection by pressing shift number 1 to deselect, and shift number 3 to select faces, and that's the numbers above the letters, not the numpad on the right hand side, and shift number 3 to deselect face select mode, shift number 1 to select vertex mode, and shift number 2 to deselect edge mode. So they're the shortcut keys for selection. So again, that's quite a quick way to be able to change between the different select modes when you're deep in the middle of working on models where you want to switch quickly between faces and edges. I'm going to select just the one vertex, and in the number panel the one I've selected you'll see is located at X1, Y1, Z1. I'm showing this simply because when you're in edit mode the location of whatever you select is no longer referenced in the world origin, even though at the moment it's showing as though it is, simply because the object origin is sitting on the world origin. If I tab into object mode So we're back to moving objects, and move the cube. So I'll go grab along the y-axis, and we'll move 2 meters. So we've moved the cube now, and then tab into edit mode again. You'll see that location hasn't changed. It's still 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter. That's X, Y, and Z 1 meter. That's because the dimensions, when you're working in edit mode, are referencing the object origin. So that's why I stressed about the object origin and the world origin in the object mode video. So video 4, I think, was the video that went on about Cartesian coordinates, and that's just to show you it's exactly the same Cartesian coordinate system, but now it's referencing the object origin. So if I delete everything other than one vertex, I'm going to just press Control I to invert the selection. So everything that wasn't selected is now selected, and the vertex I had selected isn't. And I'm going to press X and delete vertices. In the delete menu, you've got a lot more options now than you had in object mode. So we're going to delete all the vertices, and we're left with one orphan vertex. I've taken the camera out of the scene, and if you take a render of this, and a quick way to render is just to press F12, or you can go up into the top render menu and render an image out. If you press F12, the camera is still working, but it doesn't see anything, simply because the camera doesn't recognise anything other than faces. So we can rebuild the cube by extruding that vertex, and we've got in the tools menu a lot more tools lined up, and the editing tools are down on the left hand side, but the shortcut for extrude is simply to press E. So while there's a vertex selected, if you press E and then go Y -2 and enter, you'll see that the selected vertex has now been deselected, and a new vertex has been extruded out to 2 meters on the negative y-axis. And also the selected vertex highlights part way down the edge of any edges that are connected to it. So it's something that you need to become familiar with, because there are pitfalls when you're extruding and laying vertices around that we'll talk about in a moment. So we've now got an edge, and again, if we go into object mode, you can see the edge, but if we render, you still can't see the edge, so it doesn't show. So you can have vertices and edges as references on a model that don't actually show in a finished render. Can be useful to mark center points of arcs and circles, things like that, that you may need to pick up, and it makes it much easier to do. So tab back into object mode, and I'm going to extrude the selected vertex. So we'll press E for extrude along the x-axis -2 meters, -2 meters. So we've got 2 edges and 3 vertices now. And now if we select all of those, and another thing to note while you're selecting, the last vertex selected is highlighted white where the others are highlighted orange. That's because the last vertex selected is always the active vertex, and it can have effects on when you're snapping objects together, which we'll go through in future tutorials as we're building models. But again, that's an active vertex. These are just selected vertices, and if I deselect by pressing shift and re-clicking the vertex, deselect a vertex. A non-selected vertex is black. So we've got all 3 vertices selected. If we now extrude that, if we extrude that, would form faces, but with the 3 selected, we can also press F to add a face between them. So that gives us the first face that we've created, and 3 vertices are the smallest number of vertices you can have to create a face. And that's now made up of 3 vertices, 3 edges, and 1 face. And this time, if we hit F12 and render, you can see the camera is seeing the face, not the vertices or edges. So I'm going to Control Z and just delete that face out because I want to recreate the cube. So again, just select one end vertex, and I'm selecting the last one that was created, and we can extrude this 2 meters on the Y, so it's extrude on the Y axis 2 meters, and that gives us now 4 vertices, but they're still not joined with a face, and we've got an open edge. But if we select all 4 vertices, so Shift, select, and then press F for face, we now have the top face of the cube back again. The face is made up now of 4 vertices and 4 edges with 1 face, which is classed as a quad. The one with 3 vertices was classed as a triangle, and quads are optimal when you're making deformed meshes, characters that are animated where the arms and elbows have to move shape. It's optimal to try and build the meshes using quad faces because it gives the best deformation of the characters or the objects that you're animating that deform. With the face selected, we can now extrude that face. So we'll go extrude. Just highlight that again. Go extrude, and it's already going to extrude perpendicular to the face. So it highlights the axis along which it'll extrude with a light blue line. We can drag that down, but we're going to extrude it on the minus direction 2 meters and enter. So we've reformed the cube exactly the same as it was from that one single vertex. And with using vertices, that is the general principle of how you build models, is by extruding items out. So we'll now look at edges, and as we said, we've got the vertex, edge and face select mode. So if we go on to the edge select mode, or you could have pressed Shift number 2 or Shift number 1 for vertices to toggle on and off those modes. So we're now in edge select. We've lost the vertices off the cube and we've just got edges. And when you select an edge, the selected edge is white. If you select a second edge, the last selected edge becomes white and the other one is orange. And again, as with objects and vertices, you also have an active edge, and the last selected edge is the active edge. And again, we can extrude edges, so we'll press just E, and this doesn't have a face normal direction, so it won't extrude perpendicular to anything. So it's effectively extruding freely from the position it was originally before you extruded. And you can tie that again to an axis by selecting, I'll go X minus 2, minus 2, enter. and that will drag out a complete face with it. So you can gradually build models. This is just using edge select. We'll do face in a minute, but if I rotate the view round, we've got now the cube with one extra face. This brings a shading problem because it's difficult to know which way round the faces are on the cube, which is inside and which is outside on that face. And Blender has a thing called a face normal, and if I go into overlays and just show the face normal, you'll see that this face is partially selected, so it's showing the normal direction, and the face normal points up, it doesn't point down. If we select all, it hasn't done that. So the normals are pointing inwards on the box. Let's just go Z, wireframe. So you can see on this one, just go into view 1. On the box, the face normals are inside out because of the way we extruded it. And this edge normal is pointing in the opposite direction. So that would bring shading errors when the normals aren't facing in a continuous level. And that's because you've got 3 faces coming away from a single edge. So that's something you want to try and avoid in modelling. And I'll go back into solid mode again and get rid of the normals. The overlays, we don't need them at the moment. So if you was building a model, you'd want to try and continue out a face rather than an edge. So I'm going to go into face select mode now, and this allows you to select single faces. So if we was turning this cube into a rectangle, we wouldn't want the internal face there. So I'll select the internal face, and that can be deleted by selecting faces from the delete menu. So that opens the original cube up, and we can then go back into edge select and select the 3 faces that haven't been extruded out so far, and extrude those on the -X axis. So we press E for extrude, X for the axis, and then -2. Enter. So we've now got what looks like a box with an open end, but you've actually got if we go back into vertex mode, you can see that we've got the 4 vertices selected, but that edge isn't, and that's an indicator when you don't have all the edges radiating from a selected vertex that you've got 2 vertices on exactly the same place in the 3D space. So if I just select that and grab, you can see there's another one sitting underneath it in exactly the same place. Before you enter to accept the move, you can press escape and it will return it back to where it was. And there's a merge feature that allows you to remove doubled vertices. So it's exactly the same on that corner, made up of 2 vertices, because when we extrude it out, it doesn't automatically weld them to vertices that they're sitting on top of. So if we select all the vertices and then press the shortcut M for merge, we've got an option of merge by distance. If you click on that, it's now removed 2 vertices, and in the bottom left, the merge by distance options have merged by 0.0001 meters, which is 1/10 of a micron, I think. So when you now go back into select on the corner, you'll see that all the edges, it doesn't show too clearly on this, but all of the edges are highlighted coming away from the selected vertex, which means you've no longer got the doubled vertices. There's another selection option now, which is to select an edge loop, and if you press Alt and hold Alt down and then click in edge select mode, if you press Alt and then click on an edge, it will find its way around any open edge loop or any edge loop that edge is part of. So we can select all of the end edges and press Face to close the cube up, and we've now got a rectangular shape with no internal faces. If there was an internal face there, you would have shading errors, and it's manifold, so it's completely closed. Now in face select mode, the extrusion becomes much easier. We can just extrude by pressing E. I'll do it 2 meters just to keep it similar. Another feature to look out for when you're working with vertices, edges and faces are doubled up faces. We've seen doubled up vertices that we can remove by merging, or there is a manual merge option that we'll cover in the practical exercises. But there is a situation that sometimes happens, and that is where you've got one face sitting on top of another. So if I added a face now with 3 vertices selected and then deselected everything, you could assume that that top face is made up of 2 triangles rather than one quad. But what's happened is you've got a square face sitting underneath or on top of, or exactly the same plane as a triangular face. This again can cause shading errors. And an indicator of that, I'm not sure whether it'll show, it doesn't show exactly, but it can cause, you can see there a very slight hashed line. I'm not sure which angle shows it the best, but you will get occasional shading errors on a surface where 2 faces sit together. So it's one to be avoided. And if we select the whole face, you can see even more that the top face is selected, but the overlaying face is highlighted as that there's something wrong. So that's one to look out for, and you need to find out which are the overlying faces and delete one of them. So in this situation, I've selected the edge that we put in to make the try, and we'll press X and delete only edges. So we're back to a normal, clean top face. I mentioned where vertices are sitting in the same place. I'm just going to let's press B, split that one face out in that corner. Another thing that can highlight that, and may not do it every time, but in object mode in some angles you'll see an edge coming into the model where it's split. It hasn't done it in this instance, but it's one to look out for. Grab. So we're not joined together, but we have got a double vertex, and these edges aren't the same edge. So again, in that situation, we'd select all and merge by distance to remove that doubled up vertex. But that's the basics, very quickly, of edges, faces and vertices. What I'm just going to show you is I'll delete the cube that we've just turned into effectively an L shape almost. We'll delete that by pressing X in object mode and deleting the object. And I'm going to add a cylinder. So from the add menu, which is Shift A, and we've got add, and we'll add a mesh, and we'll go down and add a cylinder. What I want to highlight on this is you'll see the cylinder's made up, and I'm not going to go into edit mode yet, but it's made up of a load of facets of straight edges spun around a centre point. And when you insert it, you have the option of having more or less vertices. So those facets can be changed by changing the shading mode of the faces. And if I tab now into object mode, into edit mode, out of object mode, you'll see the separate flat faces that we can see that the cylinder is made up from. And any curved surface that you make is made up of faceted squares. But we can change the shading mode, and with everything selected, we can select the face menu and go down to shade smooth. This causes shading errors because we've got a 90-degree corner that we don't want to smooth over, because it becomes too difficult for it to calculate how you would actually shade that as a corner. Where these shallow edges, it's easy to work out to adapt the face normals to make it look like a curved surface rather than a faceted surface. So to get over that, there's a couple of ways. One is if we go into face select mode and select the top and bottom faces, and we can go into the face menu and shade those top faces flat. So we've now got rid of the faceted, we no longer see the faceted shape. If I just tab back into object mode, we don't see the facets around the outside of the curve anymore. But if you zoom in, you will see the facets on the edge. If deselect it's easy, you will see the curve is actually made up of flat edges. So this comes down to choosing how many, tab back into edit mode, how many segments you want the circles to be made up from. This was 32 faces that made up the circle of the cylinder. If I just tab into object mode and delete that, X and delete to get rid of that, and then shift add, again another mesh cylinder. If I add this one at 16 vertices to make up the circle, it's emphasised much more. If I now shift add again and add another cylinder, this time if I add it at 64 vertices, so one sitting on top of the other, and then move that, grab X 2 meters, you can see the difference between the facets. They're almost invisible where you've got more vertices making up the circles. So whenever you're working on areas where you need close bends, you can shade smooth and have more vertices, so you don't see the faceting. Where things are in the distance and it doesn't really matter, what you can do is have less vertices, and that faceting won't be so noticeable when it's a small item in the distance from the shot you created. One other thing that you can do, rather than shading smooth everything and then shading flat the faces you want flat, you can use auto smooth. And if I select this cylinder and go object shade smooth, you have the same thing as if you're shading all the faces smooth. But in the properties panel for that cylinder, if you go down to the mesh options, you've got normals as one of the options. If you click on that, there's an auto smooth option, and if you click on auto smooth, anything less than the angle that's specified in the text box will be shaded smooth, and anything sharper than that will be shaded flat, so it's automatically worked out that there's very little angle between the outer edges, but the top face is perpendicular to the sides, which is more than 30 degrees, so it's worked out that the top and bottom faces are shaded flat, the rest are shaded smooth. So that's one other option that can make it easy as you're modelling, and there's others using edge split modifiers, which we'll talk about as we're modelling in some of the projects. So that's the basics, I think, of edges, faces and vertices. So hopefully you'll carry that through now when we start modelling and understand a little bit more about why things are being shaded the way they are. There is one further face type in Blender. You've seen the tris and the quads earlier in the video, but there's also a face type called an n-gon, which can have any number of vertices. And if we tab back into edit mode, you'll see the top face of the cylinder is an n-gon, and this is made up of the 16 vertices all the way around the outside of it. One of the things that you'll find with n-gons is they need to be kept on a flat surface. You wouldn't want to have an n-gon on a deforming surface, because effectively the Blender has to triangulate the top surface into basically separate triangles, and it wouldn't do the optimum triangulation to give you a good deformation. So very useful for large flat solid model surfaces and hard surfaces, but not very good to, or not advised to use on anything that would deform in an animation. One of the feature of an n-gon is if you cut a hole in the middle of it, that hole has to be joined to the outside. I can demonstrate this by just quickly using the knife tool, which is the shortcut K, and the mouse will turn to a knife. If you just snap where you want a few vertices in the top of the cylinder and enter, it will automatically choose two adjoining edges to join that centre cut to the outside. And if I just select the vertices of that centre one and delete the face, you can see now through to the middle you've cut into the mesh, which is one of the other tools we'll be talking about in the next video. Hopefully you've understood the basics of what's happening with vertices, edges and faces, and that information should sort of carry you in good stead as you go into more complex things. It's always better to understand the basics rather than trying to work them out on the fly as you're doing new things with Blender. In the next video I'm going to be looking at the editing tools, so we'll be looking at extruding, cutting, spinning and various other basic tools that come with Blender to help you build the models to the shape that you require. Hopefully you'll find that informative as well, and after that video we'll then move on to the next stage, which will be the more practical stage of the learning process. Thanks for watching, and as I say in all the videos, if you're finding this informative and useful, please subscribe to the channel. The more people that subscribe to it, the more it gets circulated on YouTube, and the more people will get the opportunity to take on board some of this information. Thanks again, and see you soon. Bye bye.